Jung defined the self as the totality of a person's being, capitalized to emphasize its identity as something central and sacred. He thought the self was the central psychic force behind our development, the thrust engine in the individuation process, its energy expressed in our ability to constantly become something new while maintaining a cohesive personality. Quote, blueprint of our potential unfolding and the path to greater unity of the conscious and unconscious in us, guiding us into greater wholeness. It is the God within. Quote, I have called our center the self. Intellectually, the self is no more than a psychological concept, a construct that serves to express an unknowable essence which we cannot grasp as such, since by definition it transcends our powers of comprehension. It might equally well be called the God within us. The beginnings of our whole psychic life seem to be inextricably rooted in this point, and all our highest and ultimate purposes seem to be striving towards it. This paradox is unavoidable, as always, when we try to define something that lies beyond the bourne of our understanding. End quote. If we see the self as an organ of meaning and an inexhaustible source of our inner luminosity, its healing function becomes apparent. The nearer we draw, the more integrated and whole we become. In becoming more whole, we become more of who we are, and thereby better able to share and express our gifts in service of the world. But the self is not just the end of our aim, it is the charioteer driving us on. It is the voice and presence that pokes and prods and calls to a higher ground of a more complete knowledge of ourselves. It is both the guide and goal of individuation. The process, much like branches diverging as they stretch upward, of becoming a distinct individual and realizing the potentials inside at birth. If individuation is the mountain, the self is the apex and the Sherpa that carries, quote, the teleological intention of becoming itself as fully as it can, end quote. Even if the self is, in the end, unknowable to a degree, we can still make progress on the path to know thyself in all our light and shadow. The process is one of coming home, not to a place cut off from or superior to others, but to the position in the collective tapestry where our presence makes the whole most beautiful. In fully expressing our identity and gifts, fresh life rushes into the world's soul. Quote, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms, end quote. There is a reason our, quote, experiences of the self are numinous, powerful, moving, and transcendent, end quote. The self connects us to God and to all other living things. Quote, alongside our powerful biological instinct stands an equally powerful urge to become who we could be and to connect to something beyond the personal, end quote. These encounters with God within introduce us to the God without. Here we start to see some of Jung's overlap with the biblical ideas and early Christian thinkers, in addition to later Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart. When Paul writes in Ephesians that we are his workmanship, being built together in a dwelling of God in the Spirit, we can see how the self might be a connecting point, a bridge between us and the eternal, the imago Dei, image of God, within which God may dwell. When David writes in Psalms, you created my innermost parts, you wove me in my mother's womb, the Hebrew word he uses, kiliote, translates literally to kidneys. That's not likely what he meant, though. In ancient Hebrew, the word kiliote is often used as a synonym for innermost being. This is distinct from how we traditionally understand soul or consciousness. What David is referring to here is something more like Jung's concept of the self, encompassing the totality of being conscious and unconscious, soul and gut. It's similar to what the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart gestures at when he describes the birth of the soul. Where Jung uses the self, Eckhart uses the soul to refer to the seed of the divine inside us that wants to blossom into its potential. Quote, even the pagan masters such as Cicero and Seneca speak of the nobility of the inner man, that is the spirit, and the worthlessness of the outer man, that is the flesh, saying that no rational soul can exist without God, and the seed of God is in us. With a good, wise, and industrious farmer, that seed would flourish all the more and would grow up towards God, whose seed it is, and the fruit would be akin to God's nature. The seed of a pear tree grows into a pear tree, and that of a nut tree into a nut tree, and that of a seed of God grows into God. But if the good seed has a foolish and wicked farmer, then weeds will grow, smothering the good seed and pushing it out, so that it cannot reach the light or grow to its full height. But as the great Master Origen says, Since it is God himself who has engendered this seed, sowing and implanting it, it can never be destroyed or extinguished in itself. Even if it is overgrown and hidden, it glows and gleams, shines and burns, and always seeks God. End quote. As Eckhart saw it, we are bearers of the imago Dei, image of God, given a soul to participate in godliness in divinity. Both Eckhart's soul and Jung's self represent an inner place where we might meet the essence of God and be lifted beyond time and space. A place untouched by anything in the world, nameless and without form, but containing all potentialities of being. For Eckhart and many other Christian mystics, the soul is our spark of the divine intellect and share of the eternal light. It is what, being unified with the transcendent, sets us apart from other creatures incapable of what we call consciousness and what Eckhart called the intellect. And that divine presence placed at the heart of us, humans, it is what, being unified with the transcendent, sets us apart from other creatures incapable of what we call consciousness and what Eckhart called intellect. And that divine presence placed at the heart of us humans sets the foundation and establishes the necessary preconditions for right action and blessedness. When we begin to see our lives as a journey of self-discovery, a quest toward the center of ourselves, we can imagine our lives as a never-ending search to uncover more. Sending ourselves further down is the foundation for stretching further up. Going further in gives us the resources to expand further out. When the success of our lives and enterprises comes not from the wealth or status that we gain, but from what we learn about ourselves and who we become in the process, life becomes less about the accumulation of things and more about the cultivation of a soul that needs nothing outside itself. But when we do the opposite and make life and its success depend on what we do or what we have, we anchor ourselves to possessions and past versions of ourselves. We cling to the status or wealth of the parts of society that give off the appearance of success and happiness, often abandoning ourself in the process. Throughout our lives, the self, the God within, constantly calls us to shed these former and lesser versions of ourselves. Quote, in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. End quote. When Revelation 2:17 and 18 say that there is a white stone with a new name only we will know on it, the implication is that there is a God-authored identity at the core and center of who we are and who we were born to be. We were stamped with a unique self whose goal is its fullest expression. The closer we come to embodying that identity, the closer our lives are aligned with the Spirit. To live such a life is to live according to our Aristotelian telos. Yet, so many of us live a life wishing to be something other than what we are. We set ourselves against the stream of ourself and against the grain of our telos from the beginning and hope that we can somehow overcome the gravity of our nature to flourish. That's not to say we cannot make what we want out of our lives. It's just to say that we can't make whatever we want out of our lives. There are limits within which we must operate if we want to blossom. There is a finite level of freedom to select for ourselves within a framework that has boundaries. If we ignore these boundaries, we become the branch that rebels against the tree. We cut ourselves off from the source of life and then wonder why we decay. Imagine a knife that wants to be a cup or a hammer that wants to be a saw. In each case, the knife and the hammer wish to be something directly opposed to their design. Suppose they insist in their stubbornness to be used for their self-selected purpose rather than their created identity. In that case, they doom themselves to miserable lives of purposelessness. For the knife cannot hold water, and the hammer cannot cut. It is an existence where one cannot be excellent. It is an existence without eudaimonia, an existence where the soul or self cannot grow into what it can be and thus never feels the joy of progressing in that direction. This is how so many of us set our lives up, when we set our days to spend so much of our time engaged in activities and tasks that are so wildly opposed to who the self wants to become. How then can we connect more deeply with the self? How can we progress toward the grail? Make a habit of practicing anything that builds a relationship with the divine within. Meditation, prayer, fasting, writing, anything in the imaginative arts. Allow yourself to settle in and listen to the subtle nudges. Use your curiosity as a signal to explore something more deeply. Treat your life as an archaeological project, doing what you can to excavate a little more of your ruins every day, uncovering a little more of the mystery every day. Cultivating this relationship with these practices leads to deeper insights and paves the way for wholeness. In the filth it will be found, the missing puzzle pieces that fill out the frame of who you could be. As always, it is up to us whether we have the courage and commitment to brave the wilderness in their pursuit. On the topic of each of us carrying a unique gift that derives from the same source, in other words, the Spirit, and how stewarding that gift in service to others is what we're here for, here's a verse I love. Quote, "Now there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of ministries in the same Lord. There are varieties of effects, but the same God who works all things in all persons. But to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, and to another the word of knowledge according to the same Spirit." End quote.